So I wake up and it wasn't a dream. There's Dewey Freeman right there on my
Maybe
computer.
a little bit of a nightmare, but not a dream.
No, a good one. A good one. How are you, buddy?
I'm well. How about yourself?
I'm good, thanks. Been a good week.
It's been a great week here too. We are getting ready to, by now, tomorrow, we will be probably it's 8 o'clock. We'll be taking off from here. Our plane takes off around 8 a.m. tomorrow morning for Alaska. So
Is this an annual sojourn for you?
it's our second one.
So it's the second annual.
Yeah, second annual. We try and go some place special every year. Actually, we went to Alaska last year thinking it would probably be our only one, and it was so fantastic that it was like we just went, okay, well, we're just going to go back, but to a different place. We live where we have, like, for instance, a lot of wildlife around here.
You live in a mountain. Yeah. Not a beach town.
And it's still incredibly civilized compared to Alaska. And where Alaska is, it's like exponentially in a different place.
For astute and old-time listeners of the show, if you look at the opening of the show, there's a beautiful outdoors image, and that is from last year's trip to Alaska.
Oh.
Yes. So we'll be looking for a new picture. We'll update our image. By the way, we hit a milestone last week, sir.
We did.
50 shows.
The big 50.
Yeah, I think, like, you'd say, hey, who's counting? What do they say?
Consistent. A big deal.
I think so. Consistency over time equals results, right? We've all heard that a million times. It's a big sign up in our dojo. And I think in anything that you do, and especially in this new medium, it's so easy to be able to do these shows now. Lots of people do them. And it's a great way to, on a regular basis, get stuff out, but it's that consistent. Every week, early in the morning, we get up, we do this, we do the work of getting things out. And I think anybody who is creating content, which I think is quite a few people these days creating content, whatever that looks like, it's the, I can't tell you how many people, because I do, I'm a showrunner on podcasts, and I've done this for several years now. They do 5 shows and they think that's it. Oh, I did 10 shows. And it's like, yeah, no, you didn't do anything. It's
when I talk about the contact over time creates connection over time creates relationship over time creates intimacy. That's actually what we're doing here.
100%.
And there's something very different about show number 50 or 51, which is what this will be, versus number 5. It's the level of depth and knowing each other and being able to roll with each other.
And let's add one really important nugget to that. We have been inside the head of our audience for that whole time.
Yes.
And people, what's so unique about this medium, because I'm going to guess most people listen to us, not watch us, is that we're literally inside their head, and they get to know the sound of your voice, and they can tell when we're tired. They can tell. You can't help, because we're humans. We're good pattern recognizers. And we get to know when we're excited and when we're vulnerable and when there's deep emotion, and they feel as if they know us, because they do.
Yes. And part of what I hope that does for people is allow them to have discussions with themselves and with other people who are close to them. Maybe in the same way that you and I are,
Mhm.
to go into a place of being vulnerable, to go into a place of not trying to come on here and be perfect, of not, you know, um, it's sort of like, I think some of it's changing, but it used to be like Facebook was, when people would post pictures on Facebook, everyone was happy. They would take pictures of the most incredible meal. The it was like if we all lived that life, we would, everything would be perfect in the world, but it's not. So we're not trying to just put our, you know, the perfect picture, the perfect show, the best foot forward, the perfect thing to say. We, I mean, I know that we both come on here and share from our hearts and the depths of our being. And at the same time, it's like we screw up. We are vulnerable. We can't think of something in the moment. We, yeah. So the level of aliveness that is in this is really pretty amazing.
And to piggyback on that idea of the continually building, and in one sense you're building, right?
Mhm.
The other sense is you're unbuilding, you're peeling back.
And talk about a little bit what you mean by peeling back. I agree with you, but let's make sure everybody knows.
Is that each, you know me, I'm always thinking in pictures. Each break, we've talked it at over time, and is we're building this relationship. I think of it as bricks. We're building this building. It's not a wall. We're building this building as bricks. As we build it, the bricks are getting clearer. And there's more transparency, right? We can see through. And I think what that's done is we've built, not only between you and I, but with the audience, a know, like, and trust factor over time.
Totally.
And that got me thinking that we probably are at a point in the relationship where we could talk about something that I heard in an off comment this week in a class that you happen to be in, that got me thinking. I took note of it, and you told a story about, and I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm just going to tease it out, and then I'd love to hear the story of your, I guess when you were born, your mom was gone for the first 18 months. And I want to understand a little bit more about that.
Jump into that a little bit.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. One of the, just for a little context for folks, I'm in a class with Mark and his wife, Kimberly, on putting together businesses and storytelling and sharing our stories through actually storytelling. And through one of our processes in the class, I was asked, is there one thing that sort of drives what I have done basically through my life? And in all honesty, I was a little bit surprised by that question. I wasn't quite prepared for that question in the way that it was asked. And when I say that the question was asked in a very positive way, just so when I say in the way that it was asked, I There's nothing disparaging about that at all. And there are a number of events in my life that have driven where I'm have taken my life. And what I was asked, is there one major thing that has really been at the core of what I've done in my life? And so I chose to answer from really the most core place that could be. And what that answer is that when I was born, my mother was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Actually, she was diagnosed 5 months into her pregnancy with me. And that would have been the diagnosis came in 1949. I was born shortly after that, 1950. And there were no antibiotics that treated tuberculosis at the time. In fact, antibiotics were a relatively new thing. And that had literally just been developed in late World War II and had not really been on the market yet. The only way that somebody with tuberculosis would heal from that would be to be isolated, because tuberculosis is highly, highly contagious. And so at my birth, I was separated from my mother immediately. I was born separated. And my mother was remained in the hospital for a couple of days to make sure that she was healthy enough from the birth, from giving birth, but then went into a sanitarium back in Northeast Ohio. Actually, interestingly enough, it's called the Edwin Shaw Sanitarium, and I later in my life went there numerous times just to see it. And my mother took me there.
Now, a sanitarium in my background was there was a mental condition, but I think in this case, 70 years ago, was it more of a long-term care facility?
It was a long-term care facility for, actually, then there were two things going on. One is tuberculosis, and the other is, and later, polio. And right now, for instance, if somebody contracted tuberculosis, they would be isolated and put on antibiotics, and they'd be through it in about 3 weeks, 3 weeks to a month. Thank goodness that tuberculosis is not a rampant disease that's out there. In fact, it's almost gone in the world. But at the time, that was not happening. So interestingly enough, the only thing that really cured it to the best that they could were some sulfa drugs, because sulfa is a kind of an antibiotic, but it's not the same kind that we have now. And rest, and interestingly enough, sunshine.
Vitamin D. So now how long did she stay there?
She was there full-time for well over 6 months, closer to 8 months. And then she would be in and out. I did not live with her until I was 18 months old. I could not go. She was not healthy enough for me to go live with her.
So who was the primary caregiver?
My grandfather, which is the person I have my last name named from. I actually changed that in my adult life. And my grandmother, of course, and one of my aunts. And I was basically taken care of by them and my father, interestingly enough. I mean, my father certainly had his faults throughout his life, but he took care, to the best of his ability, of my mother, of me, of my then sister, I mean, I still have my sister,
Sure.
but my sister was a little over a year older than me, and he was very dedicated to doing that and did that well. Um, as hard as it was on him, and I know it was. But basically, I grew up with issues, obviously, around attachment and trust, and is there somebody going to be there for me, and those kinds of things. So, and part of what I was speaking about when I was asked that question earlier is that many times really tough things happen in our life and they're nobody's fault. And so I was classically dealing with attachment issues because I was with my mother for 9 months, pulled out right after birth, and to me, she disappeared. And there's even an article when I moved back in with them when I was 18 months old from then the Akron Beacon Journal is the name of the newspaper that was in, where my mother is quoted saying I was like a neighborhood kid moving in. There was so little attachment between us.
And that formed the basis for your life's work.
That formed the basis for my life's work. I struggled. I did two things growing up, interestingly enough. On many levels, I did really well. And other levels, I just had this empty hole in me, which interestingly enough, if anybody has listened to previous podcasts or other things that I've done or our previous shows, the two things that fill me are nature, and as under the umbrella of nature is our horses. And I spent my life as a kid getting up as early as I could, and I would be outside. And in my teen years, I worked on farms, and I would come in at dark, and that was my life, and that's where I formed my earliest attachments, is with nature. And I'd wander through the woods and play in the swamps and help out on different farms, and yeah, that's that. And my grandfather, who still is deeply embedded in my heart, are the two places where I really connected in.
That's why I have wanted to be a grandfather since I was 12.
Yeah, is that because you connected to your grandfather?
I only saw him once a year.
Oh,
I saw him at Christmas, on Christmas Day. Growing up, my dad got custody of us one day a year, and we would go see his family at Christmas time. And so I'd see my grandpa, and I just loved this old guy and his stories, and he was just awesome. And how much time can you have? You got a day, not even a whole day, right? And so I had determined at the very young age of 12 that I can remember that I wanted to be a young dad solely for the purpose of being a young grandfather.
No
Mission
kidding.
accomplished.
Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished. Yeah. So I can be a very active grandfather and not be just a,
once a year on Christmas.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the reason that story about you not having your mom there for 18 months resonated for me is that about 10 years ago, I was in a therapy session, and he started asking me questions about my mom, and we uncovered that she was a shift nurse, and she was gone most of the time. She was gone. And I was raised by babysitters, and from the day one, apparently. And that I never knew where she was because it rotated.
Wow.
Gone during the day, gone during the night, graveyard shift, shift work. So it's, where is she? Where is she? Where is she? And so I was always, she was there, but then she wasn't, right? She's
Right.
there and then she's not. And the way that manifested was I would have an unhealthy attachment to the women in my life, holding on too tight for fear of them leaving.
Mm.
And so I would always be worried then they were gone, which is, I think it's maybe jealousy, but not, it was something different. It was just they're leaving, right?
Right.
And long history of that whole life until 10 years ago when he was like, well, this is what happened. And I was like, and it was, it's interesting. You're a therapist, so you see classic stuff. You see it in everybody. You go, yeah, yep, that's what happened. And he was so matter of fact about it. It was like, dude, that's not unique to you. It's like, yeah, that happened. Dude, let's get you past that. And he did. In one session, we got rid of that. And that's why my radar was lit when I heard about that. And I knew instantly that's why you've studied attachment your whole life. And it's at the core of what we talk about is that in relationships. And I thought, isn't it interesting how these things that happened early in life affected all of it? And what it makes me think about is, as a parent, as an employer, as a boss, as a leader, as a mentor, as someone of a higher status than someone else, someone who's looking to me for something, whatever that is, having a sense of, I guess responsibility is the word that comes to me, about knowing that I'm modeling behavior, or my behavior is going to have an impact, like it or not.
Well, what you just said may be one of the most profound things that anybody could say under any circumstances. And here's what I mean by that. It is true that those early experiences affect us deeply. And I'm going to wander here for a minute or two, if I may. Is what I love is that you had a experience that you can identify where a therapist said X, Y, and Z and checked this out with you and became curious about what was going on for you. And it was like, whoa, got it. What was interesting for me in my journey is I didn't put all of that together until I was working with, and not working with as therapists, but like coworkers, with a woman who was adopted. And she was sharing her story. And this, I don't know, 22-ish, maybe 24-ish, somewhere in there. And she was sharing her story around adoption. And I went, oh my God, that's my story. But because it was almost, if I could put it in this way, it was almost like I was adopted by my birth mother after my birth mother disappeared. Does that make sense? And it was like, and so I really began looking at what went on in my life, and it was like, oh, I can tie that together with this, and and that's really when I began looking at the attachment stuff. And the piece that you're talking about or spoke about around how you would attach to women a lot of times and I don't know if this is 100% true for you, so please don't let me overstep on that one. Is that when we lose our mothers, we attach to women almost as if we sort of have this dual thing going on. It's like, well, they're our honey, our lover, our wives, our girlfriends, our partners. But then we put this layer of motherhood on them to try to replace what we didn't get. And I don't know anybody who does that can live in that kind of relationship that's a real workable relationship. And we're not supposed to be marrying our mothers.
Exactly.
And interestingly enough, sort of another tie-in is the whole piece with Robert Bly's Iron John of it's like, go get the key out from under your mother's pillow. So that's a big thing that happens. And that was a piece that I really had to work with. And like you said, it wasn't jealousy, it was just neediness, at least on my part, that's what it was. And
which, by the way, is very unattractive.
Very unattractive. That does not keep women around. It does not make women want to open up to us. It does not
Correct.
make women want to be our partners. It does not make women want to be with us romantically.
No, what you want to hear them say is, I like it when you're strong.
Yeah. When there's something I can attach to versus us being needy to attach. And the caveat with this is, it's like, well, of course, I want to attach to the woman that I'm in love with. I want that. But there's a clean kind of an attachment that can happen, and vice versa. Let me throw in one other piece here, and I'm going to get a little scientific here. Have you ever heard of the word epigenetics?
I have. But maybe our audience hasn't.
Right. So here's what epigenetics is. Epigenetics is the scientific process of looking at what happens genetically and what genes get turned on and affect our lives and what genes don't get turned on. In the research it's literally only been the last 20 years, interestingly enough, of the research on epigenetics and what genes get turned on or what genes don't get turned on in our system is those genes are activated or deactivated by our relational experience.
Hold on just a second. So so the genes aren't turned on or off before birth or during birth, during gestation, that those have the process of being turned on or off after we're born?
Well, they get turned on or off in gestation and during birth because of the relational process there. But what we've thought for who knows how long is that our genetics are genetics and our DNAs are DNA. Well, that's not accurate. There is some of that is accurate. But what epigenetics really looks at is the level of attachment that we have is, and how we attach actually turns on or inhibits the turning on of certain genetic processes. Here's what's even more cool, is that happens throughout our entire lives.
I was going to ask if there's a fluidity to that.
There's a total fluidity to it. And there's a literally, and we actually haven't even known about this well enough, deeply enough for a long enough time but it's very possible to do like a genetic scan of a person when they're born and a genetic scan when they're 50, and for that to be completely different because of
Mm.
their experience in life.
So then let me riddle me this, Batman. So I believe that one of those switches, let's call it the neediness switch, for lack of a better
okay, we
term.
will coin that word today.
I'm sure if there's any
Dr. Mark
epigeneticists
Sylvester
on the call, they're like, oh no, dude, that's not how it works. But if in fact, and I believe what you're saying, that experience can flip the switch, so to speak,
totally.
that session with my guy 8-10ish years ago flipped that switch, and it's a kind of got a feeling it's binary, because
You're on
that
the right
went
track.
that went away, because I can't unhear that. And so it took a little while where I would kind of see that behavior and I'd go, I don't need to do that. That's not true now. That's a story that I'd been telling myself, but now it's not a story. It's just the switch was in the wrong position. Thanks, Doc, because no doubt I don't feel, I feel like, oh, come on, it's just a switch. I can go there pretty easily. So now I want to see my whole dashboard of all the switches in my life. Okay, let's go fuss with a couple of those.
Well, it's not exactly binary. It's not quite computer the 0 1 0 1 0 1 1 1 1 1 0 0 0. That's not quite that. But it is fascinating though that we can change, and it's fascinating that our genetic processes can and do change. And it's not just from relationship. It's from whom we have relationships with, who and are the people that we have relationships with. How do we relate to the natural world? The natural world actually has tremendous impact on what genetic processes get opened or not. Has to do with the exercise that we do in our life. We talk a lot about, I mean, you and I have talked a lot about being in the dojo. We've talked a lot about, having strong bodies in the nation. We've talked about, I mean, yesterday I did a 2.5, 3 hour ride with Moon, my horse, which was a really, really intense training ride for both of us. Both of us are sore today. And those things, as well as nutrition, play major factors in what genetic processes get turned on and what genetic processes get inhibited. And that goes on throughout our lives. There's research being done that has right now that has to do with, can at 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 80, can our genetic processes be affected? And the answer is absolutely.
So let's extend that a little bit. So do you have a sense of how long that here's where I'm going. So if, to your point, if we measured the DNA in your genetics, which we now can do, we couldn't do it before. It's probably expensive. You can't just go to the CVS and have it done. But if you measure it at birth and you measure it at waypoints throughout your life, you would absolutely notice a change, to your point. And it was epigenetics that we could go study to learn a little bit more about that. And that I am changed. We are changed as a result of that. we pass on our DNA
Yes.
to children, right?
Mm.
So are you suggesting that, this is kind of odd, but that as we have children at different phases in life, typically it's in a cluster every couple of years, you have 2 or 3 kids typically, right? I don't know how much changes within that point of view, but if you were to have a child at 20 and a child at 30 and a child at 40, not recommending that to anyone, but if you did,
No, no,
that the DNA would be different that you passed along?
totally.
Hmm.
Because we're different.
Hmm.
I mean, even in my family, what's interesting, my sister and I are a year apart, and we were very close, still are. I mean, she's one of my super best friends in the world. Just spoke to her yesterday. Had 2 younger brothers, 4 and 6 years younger than me. And it was like we were 2 different families.
Hmm.
It was like Susan and I grew up in one family, and Mark and John, my 2 younger brothers, grew up in another family. And we're very, very different. So yes, I'm suggesting that. I'm suggesting that there's a relatively new term out there in the therapeutic world called emotional inheritance, where how we work with emotional process and the emotions of previous generations literally get passed down through the genetics, and what genes, what DNA and what genes have gotten passed down. So it what we're learning is a really big deal on how we end up being able to cope in the world, how we end up being able to be resilient in the world, and also what healing can take place for us. And many times I'll make the statement of, we get injured in relationship because that's where we get emotionally and sometimes physically injured. Say a breakup or
Sure.
A loss of a child or those kind of things. But the only way to heal is in relationship. But it's the relationships that we're in that actually, 1, help us heal, but 2, help change all of that epigenetic process inside of us. So it's not just a behavioral process. It's not just okay, I'm going to do a behavioral thing and I'm going to be a better person.
You've
I'm
heard
not putting
of
down
hacking. You've heard of hacking, right?
Oh,
So it's
sure.
hacking the natural order of whatever that thing is. I'm going to go. So there's life hackers, right? Body hackers. There's all kinds of hacking. Is there gene hacking at play here?
This is one of the things I love about you because of how your brain works. It's like, okay, I don't know if I would call it hacking, but I will tell you that we can share our nervous systems. And in some ways that is hacking. At least does that make sense?
Here, where I'm going with that is, so if our listeners followed along so far, it's we can take some of these core things. Genetics is core. I don't think you get any more core than that in our DNA, and that experience and relationship changes that over time for the good or the bad. And so if that's our premise, and I believe that premise, right? You've made the case for that. Then if I want to alter that, I can work on myself, right?
Totally.
And so that I'm better now as a result, but I'm and as I'm sharing my energy, my nervous system with everybody I come into contact with, I'm having a positive impact on them, which is having, to our point, right? That's what we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Which gets me to thinking that there's a lot of people who aren't in relationship. And if I'm not in relationship, meaning I'm isolated, I'm lonely, I'm a lone wolf, I'm all of those kind of things,
Mhm.
then I don't have the opportunity to have that kind of genetic growth, if you will. Right?
That's 1,000% accurate.
Huh. Which is
And
why, as we look at, you know, we like to say, we have more yesterdays, you and I, than we have tomorrows.
mhm,
And that one of the things you talked about, health, wellness, and nutrition. Those are the three legs of this stool that keep us balanced. And on the wellness side of that is relationship and social connection. And
yes.
as we get older, we lose our spouse, right? Who a lifelong spouse, right?
Mhm.
We tend to not replace them, and we're by ourselves, and we tend to retreat into that loneliness. Or we're in a long-term relationship and we can never love again, and so we're just going to live alone. We're doing all of that.
Right.
And what we hear often, and I have a father-in-law who, you know, my wife lost her mom and he's alone, and we've done everything we can, and it's working to have him have a very robust social life, right? Very robust,
Absolutely.
actually. And you can see the difference. Absolutely see the difference. So the person who's listening right now, who's maybe a lone ranger and they're working on themselves, or they're doing whatever they have to do, is it boy, I'm making these great leaps
You're
today.
doing great. Keep going. You're doing
um,
great.
it feels like we're always waiting for that perfect person. Like, I can't do it until I get that perfect person. So I think it doesn't serve us to wait for the perfect person if we're not. Thankfully, I feel like I found the perfect one, and you found the perfect one, and we end up, we hope, finding that. But is it better to be in one that's not perfect than to not be in one at all?
Yes, it is. And it's also better to have numerous relationships. And when I'm saying that, I'm not talking about polyamory. I'm talking about
Right.
friends. I'm talking about, I mean, one of the things that helps make your relationship with your Kimberly perfect is that both of you have hundreds, if not thousands, of other contacts and friends, and you support that, and you are, you know, you're the only person I can get any kind of any of my needs met with, you know. And same way with me and my Kimberly, it's like we have all kinds of different friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, i.e., you and I are here. Neither of the Kimberleys are on here, and we're not asking them for permission to, can we do this? I mean, we clearly work it out collaboratively with them, but it's like this is really important. And so it's not just a relationship with a romantic partner, it's relationship, period. It's somebody that you can go take a walk with, somebody that you can sit down and actually share what's going on with you, somebody that and in your case, I mean, interestingly enough, your story regarding the therapist that you were working with, it's like he and you had enough intimacy and trust
Mm.
that he could ask you the questions he asked you, and he could say what he said to you, and you would go, oh, got it. And that was based on intimacy and trust between the two of you. You could have been walking down the street and someone could have come up to you and said, Mr. Sylvester.
So your mom was a shift nurse. Well, I guess maybe this is what happened. And you're like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, no. Yeah, exactly. It's that no like and trust factor built up over time.
Yes.
Um, I I would love to have a bit of a call to action for our, because I'm gonna guess there's a swath of our audience that had just lovely, normal mom and dad
Mhm.
deals, and so it's hard for them to relate to this. But I'm guessing there's also a lot of people who are going, "Huh, maybe I want to rethink and look at that." What kind of steps? Because in my case, I had a little help from someone I, like to your point, I trusted. What if this was a bit of a wake up call for someone? What would you suggest they do?
That's a great question. Well, one is, and I see this in tiers or levels, is one, find some people to hang out with. And it doesn't always have to be heavy duty. It can be, you know, a group of people that you bicycle with, a group of people that you go to the dojo with, a group of people that you hike with. And what I will also say is it's not going to work with a group of people you go get drunk with. That doesn't work out so well. That's one level. Another level is begin looking for some people who can actually act as a mentor in your life.
Hmm.
And that you can go to and go, yeah, I'm just having a tough day. And then I think the upper end of that would be either a really super good coach or a really solid therapist. That because that's a particularly special kind of relationship that you have a contract with, that you go, okay, we're going to look at these kinds of things. And but there's a whole slew of different levels of of building relationships. And one of the things, and I do think there are people out there who are really struggling, and they get super afraid to reach out, and super afraid to say, hey, can I get on a 5-minute call with you? Or will you just go take a walk with me? And those kinds
And
of things are really important.
I've had some of my very, very, very best revelatory moments on a walk and talk.
Yeah.
Just go to the beach, take a walk,
They
see
go
where
to
it
the
leads.
beach. Yep.
It's kind of like this show, my friend.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Kind of
It's
like
kind of
this
like
show.
this show. Like we find not always know where we're going to go, but we sure know where we're going to end, and that's what we're going to do right now. Because I want someone to think about this and actually write us in the comments in the nation, if because this can be a big, this was huge for me. I had no idea, and in an hour session he noticed a pattern that was
Yeah.
having a negative impact, and
Totally.
asked me some questions, and I was like, yep, and
Mhm.
thank goodness that happened, because now 10 years later I can talk about it, and it's not charged. Right.
Right. Right.
I'm good around it.
And let me say one thing about that, because that's really important. And this might, and I'm agreeing we need to end. The goal around working through different things is not to forget about them.
Right.
The goal is to remember them, to allow your memories to help you grow. And when you get there, because when you talk about them, there's not a charge.
Right.
It's like, I will always have a very tender place in my heart around my birth and my relationship with my mother, and what that was, and how difficult that was, and how it was different than even with my siblings. But it's like when we get off of this call or the chat, I'm not going to be going, oh my gosh, am I going to make it through the day? I'm going to go, yeah, I will always remember that. And I'll be pretty neutral about it. Hold it with tenderness, but it's not going to mess my day up. That's how
My
you
friend,
know you're through something.
have a great trip.
Thank you so very much, and thank you for